The smell of formaldehyde clung to the air in the cold room, blending with the bittersweet scent of death. Samuel adjusted his latex gloves, feeling the material tighten around his fingers as he examined the body in front of him. The black bag was marked with a strange code, a numerical sequence that wasn't listed in the records. The corpse had arrived just a few hours earlier, delivered by a morgue attendant who swore he had followed protocol. But something was wrong. There was no name, no medical file, just an unidentified body, stretched out on the steel table, awaiting the precise blade of the scalpel. Pushing aside his unease, Samuel began the procedure. The skin yielded under the initial incision, exposing layers of grayish tissue. The pathologist followed the usual steps, parting muscles and sawing through the sternum, revealing the corpse's interior. But the moment he opened the chest cavity, he felt something unusual. A faint warmth. There shouldn't be warmth. The room's cold light made the thing glisten. Nestled among the organs, cradled like a forgotten tumor, was an object. Small, irregular, with a texture similar to aged leather. And it pulsed. Samuel instinctively stepped back, his heart racing. But professional logic forced him to continue. With trembling hands, he used forceps to pull the thing from the body. The object shuddered. And then Samuel heard it, a creeping whisper, as if thousands of voices echoed from within the corpse. He couldn't make out any words, just a hypnotic murmur, scratching at the edges of his mind. The corpse, until then motionless, seemed to twitch slightly. That couldn't be. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just inside the body. It was alive. Samuel felt a chill crawl up his spine. The object pulsed against the metal forceps, its irregular surface contracting like a living organ. He tried to convince himself it was just a late muscle spasm, a chemical reaction in the corpse. Any rational explanation would do. But the whisper persisted, creeping through the air like a mouthless voice. He forced himself to take a deep breath, pushing away the fog of unease settling in his mind. He needed to analyze the thing, find out what it was. He carefully placed it in a metal tray, observing it under the cold light. The pulsation was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. But there were no vessels, no visible structure. Just that rough surface, marked by tiny fissures that seemed to open and close imperceptibly. The body on the table was wrong in so many ways. The inside was different. The veins had a dark coloration, as if saturated with something dense. The heart was there, yes, but it didn't have the expected appearance of an organ that had ceased its vital functions. It looked preserved, as if it hadn't decayed in the usual way. Samuel swallowed hard. He needed more data. He turned toward the microscope on the counter, picking up a glass slide to collect a sample. But the moment he touched the object again, something changed. The room's light flickered. The air grew dense, charged with an invisible electricity. And then something whispered right next to him. This time it was a word. Low, distorted, spoken with a weight that seemed to echo inside his own mind. Wake. Samuel froze. His hands trembled. He turned instinctively, but the room was empty. Only him, the body, and that pulsing thing. But something was different. The corpse. Its eyes were open. Samuel stumbled backward, the air rushing from his lungs. The corpse that had been an inert mass of flesh just moments ago was now staring at him. The eyes were glassy, but there was something there, a presence, a consciousness crawling behind the opaque pupils. He tried to rationalize it. Post-mortem reflex? An involuntary spasm? But the eyes, they weren't just open. They were following him. The silence in the room weighed like a tomb. Only the muffled sound of his own breathing filled the space, and then, a snap. Low, wet. The corpse's neck turned slightly to the side. Samuel swallowed hard, feeling his heart pounding against his ribs. This wasn't happening. He needed to get out. He needed to call someone. But his feet felt glued to the cold floor. Then he noticed something else. The object in the tray had stopped pulsing. It had opened. Tiny fissures, previously invisible, had widened, revealing something inside. A dark, pulsating core, something that seemed to move beneath the rough surface. And then came the smell. It wasn't the usual odor of death. It was something deeper, older. A damp, sour rot, like flesh submerged in sludge for far too long. The corpse began to move in earnest now. Fingers clawed against the steel table, dry lips parting in a grimace that could have been pain or pleasure. And then the whisper returned. This time louder. Wake. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into flashes of brightness and darkness. The tray shook. The object vibrated as if it were about to explode. And the body was trying to rise. Samuel acted on instinct. His body finally broke free from the trance of terror, and he stumbled backward, knocking one of the surgical instruments off the counter. The metal clattered against the cold floor, a sharp sound that sliced through the room's funeral silence. But the thing on the table, didn't care. The corpse rose. Not naturally. Not like someone waking from a deep sleep. No. It cracked, bones snapping at wrong angles, skin tearing in places as it forced movements impossible for a dead body. The mouth opened in a deep, dry gasp, as if sucking in air it no longer needed. Samuel saw the lungs. Yes, they inflated. But how? As if something inside them still breathed for him. The corpse jerked its head with a sudden snap, its dead eyes now fixed on Samuel. The skin around the eyelids seemed to loosen slightly, as though it were unraveling with the simple act of looking. Then came the sound, a horrible crack, something between the creak of stiff joints and the tearing of rotten flesh. The corpse lurched forward, its arms moving in erratic spasms, like a puppet of flesh pulled by invisible strings. And it advanced. Samuel stumbled back, cold sweat running down his neck. He tried to flee, but his leg caught on one of the swivel chairs, and he fell onto his back. The impact knocked the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. The thing dragged itself toward him, its bare feet scraping against the floor with a sound Samuel knew he would never forget. Cracked fingernails scraped along the metal surface of the autopsy table, leaving trails of skin and dried blood in their wake. Wake! The whisper wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside the corpse. Samuel scrambled backward, eyes wide with terror. The figure loomed over him now, its exposed ribs expanding as if trying to draw something from the very air. Then, with a sudden jolt, it screamed. Not a human scream. Not a sound that should exist in the land of the living. It was a howl saturated with echoes, multiple voices screaming at once, each with a different pitch and intensity. A chorus of horror that made Samuel's eardrums throb with pain. The object in the tray began to dissolve, thick, viscous liquid oozing from it, bubbling as if it were alive. And then, the corpse lunged at Samuel. Icy hands grabbed his shirt, digging into the fabric and the flesh beneath. The dead eyes were inches from his face now, opened too wide, hungry to devour him, desperate to see him. And Samuel saw. For a moment, something opened within those eyes. Something that wasn't human. Something that was waking up. Samuel felt the pull intensify. His body slid across the cold steel floor, dragged into the corpse as if death itself were trying to swallow him whole. He fought, digging his feet in, gripping the floor. But there was not enough friction. Invisible fingers tightened around his ankle, creeping up his leg, wrapping around his abdomen. Something cold and sticky crawled across his skin, seeping under his clothes, trying to drag him into the abyss inside that profane body. He couldn't allow this. Desperation rising, Samuel searched for anything within his reach. His hand groped the counter above his head, touching scalpels, jars of formaldehyde, and then he felt a heavy, cylindrical glass. Pure ethanol, the flammable liquid used for tissue preservation. In a surge of survival instinct, Samuel grabbed the bottle, ripped off the cap with his teeth, and poured its entire contents into the creature's chest cavity. The effect was immediate. The black vortex inside the corpse cracked and roared, as if something inside despised the liquid. The pull stopped for a second, and Samuel seized the opening. With his other hand, he fumbled on the counter again and found the emergency lighter, used occasionally to sterilize instruments. He didn't hesitate. He lit it, and threw it into the creature. The fire exploded with a guttural, supernatural howl, as if 1,000 voices were burning at once. The creature's body arched violently, its arms and legs flailing as blackened flames consumed its flesh from the inside out. Samuel rolled to the side, escaping by inches, feeling the heat lick his skin. The corpse shuddered, twisted, screamed. The black vortex imploded, collapsing inward as if being crushed by its own existence. The creature rose one last time, as if trying to cling to reality, but then it fell, finally reduced to ashes and burned flesh. And the silence came. A heavy silence. Definitive. Samuel knelt, gasping, the smell of charred flesh clinging to his clothes. He looked at the autopsy table, where a profane corpse had once been. Now there was only ash. The pulsating object? It was gone. The curse? Burned with it. Samuel had won. But the price had been high. Months later, Samuel never touched a corpse again. He left his career as a pathologist. The trauma of what he saw, what he faced, was insurmountable. Every night, he still dreamed of it. The dead eyes, the whispers, the vortex inside that body. And sometimes, just sometimes, he still heard the voice, low, distant, whispering in his mind, "Wake." The smell of formaldehyde hung in the air, thick and nauseating. In the morgue, the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerators and the occasional drip of moisture condensing on the fluorescent lights. The night was cold, and the pale light reflected off the worn tile floor, casting long, distorted shadows. It was my third week working there. I had already seen things that would keep any normal person awake at night, but nothing that couldn't be explained by science or simple chance. Until today. The body arrived around 11 p.m., brought in by apathetic paramedics, accustomed to the routine of death. Male, 38 years old, victim of a violent accident. The bones in his leg were shattered, and the skin on his face looked like it had been dragged across asphalt. Nothing unusual. I logged the entry, prepared the gurney, and with as much respect as my exhaustion would allow, positioned the corpse properly. Then, I went to take care of another task. When I returned, he was no longer there. The gurney was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, searching for a rational explanation. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I had placed the body in one of the refrigerated compartments and forgotten. But no, the zipper on the body bag was still open, a clear sign I had left him right there. I swallowed hard. That's when I saw him. The body was a few feet away, lying face down on the cold floor. But how? No one had come in. No one had left. With hesitant steps, I approached. The most disturbing thing wasn't the position he was in now. It was the way his fingers seemed to have dragged across the floor, leaving a damp, uneven trail behind, as if he had tried to move. As if he had tried to get closer to me. I slowly crouched down, my muscles tense, my mind scrambling for a logical explanation. Maybe the paramedics had left the body poorly positioned on the gurney, and it had slid off. But no, the way it had fallen didn't make sense. It wasn't a simple slip. It looked like it had been moved on purpose. The corpse's fingers were brittle, the nails scratching the tile as if, before losing his life, he had tried to hold on to something. Or someone. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat making it painful. I had to take care of this. If someone walked in and saw a body lying on the floor, I'd be the one to answer for it. I took a deep breath, grabbed the dead man's arms, stiff and cold as stone, and turned him over. The face was... It wasn't just the flesh torn from the accident. The angle of the head seemed wrong, as if someone had tried to twist it beyond the limits of the human body. The eyes, which I was sure I had closed earlier, were half open, glassy, staring at something behind me. A chill ran down my spine. The morgue had always been a lonely place, but at that moment, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. With effort, I lifted the body back onto the gurney. His limbs felt heavier than before, almost as if they were resisting the movement. I zipped up the body bag, feeling an odd sense of relief as I concealed that deformed face from view. I dragged the gurney back to its place and stood still. Nothing. Maybe it was my imagination. Exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I returned to my station, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. The computer monitor glowed faintly, reflecting my tense expression on the screen. But then, a sound echoed through the morgue. Soft, yet unmistakable. The scrape of nails on metal. Behind me, the zipper on the body bag began to open. The sound of the zipper sliding froze me in place. It was impossible. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. My ears rang, but the reality was there, raw and insane. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting in pure terror. The body bag was partially open, revealing a patch of the corpse's pale, lifeless skin. But the worst part was the movement. The body inside was moving. It wasn't a post-mortem spasm. It wasn't a random muscle contraction. It was a deliberate motion. The zipper kept sliding down, inch by inch, until an arm emerged from the bag, its elbow creaking, the twisted hand clawing at the metal gurney. Horror consumed me. My legs screamed at me to run, but fear rooted me to the spot. Then, before I could react, came the sound that shattered what little sanity I had left. Breathing. A faint, ragged breath, like rotting lungs struggling to fill with air again. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I acted on pure instinct. Gripping the gurney with all my strength, I shoved it with everything I had, sending it crashing violently into the wall. The impact was brutal. The body inside jolted, a sharp crack echoing through the room. But then came the worst part. Slowly, far slower than anything natural, the corpse's head turned toward me. The eyes, once dull and lifeless, were now fixed on me. There was no life in them, but there was intent. And then it rose. Not like someone waking from a deep sleep, but like something that should never have moved again. The bones in its spine cracked as it sat up, its neck tilting at an impossible angle, the face, horribly torn from the accident, twisting into something almost smiling. I stumbled backward, my entire body seized by pure desperation. I ran to the door, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the lock. But the latch was stuck. Behind me, the sound of bare feet dragging across the cold floor drew closer. I was no longer alone in the morgue. My fingers slid over the door latch, sweaty and trembling. I pulled, pushed, slammed against it, but nothing. It was stuck. Behind me, the footsteps grew faster. It wasn't the normal sound of someone walking. It was an uneven dragging, as if the bones were dislocated, the feet scraping across the floor with a rough, wet sound. I couldn't look back, but I did, and I wished I never had. The corpse was only a few feet away, its neck slumped to one side, jaw slack, but the eyes, those eyes devoured me. There were no pupils, just a dull reflection of the morgue's cold light. And then it lunged. It didn't walk. It didn't stumble. It charged at me like a predator, twisted arms stretching out to grab me. I screamed and threw myself to the side at the last second. The body crashed into the door with a sickening thud, bones cracking and a wet sound of flesh tearing. But it didn't stop. Before it could turn back toward me, I grabbed the instrument cart beside me and shoved it with all my strength. It toppled over the corpse, scattering scalpels, forceps, and jars of formaldehyde that shattered on the floor. The chemical smell flooded the air. I ran. Dodging the gurney, I leaped over shards of glass and threw myself against the panel of the body refrigerators. If I couldn't get out, then neither would it. My hands shook as I yanked open one of the empty steel drawers. Big enough for a body. Big enough to trap it. Behind me, the sound of scraping metal made me turn. The corpse was standing again. The impact against the door had dislocated its shoulder, leaving the arm dangling at a grotesque angle. But it didn't seem to feel pain. It only wanted to get me. It ran again. My lungs burned, my heart hammered in my chest. I stood there, frozen, trying to believe it had worked. But then, the thud came from inside the drawer. Stronger. And then the worst. The voice. Weak, raspy, and human. "Let me out." The voice echoed through the morgue like a whisper torn from hell. It wasn't just a sound. It was a weight, something that seeped into my ears and coiled inside my mind, as if that thing were speaking directly into my head. My fingers still gripped the drawer's latch, but they trembled so much I could barely feel my own strength. The pounding grew more intense, the steel door vibrating with each hit. This couldn't be possible. It couldn't be real. A corpse doesn't speak. A corpse doesn't move. And yet, it was there. "Let me out." The latch creaked. The metal, once solid, began to bend outward. My blood ran cold as I saw the outline of fingers starting to push through the gap, chipped nails scraping against the surface. I had to do something. Now. My eyes scanned the room, desperate for a solution. I saw the formaldehyde jars shattered on the floor, a metal tube used for drainage, and then there, on the overturned tray of instruments, something glinted. The scalpel. I ran and grabbed it, the sharp blade reflecting the cold light. But what was I going to do? Stab a corpse that should already be dead? The drawer cracked open slightly, and I appeared. Glassy. Dull. But watching. Watching me. Panic consumed me. Without thinking, I lunged at the drawer and pushed it shut with all my strength. The corpse reacted, its cold fingers trying to grab me, cracked lips moving in a soundless murmur. I screamed. I screamed like never before. And then, driven by pure desperation, I raised the scalpel and plunged it straight into the thing's eye. The body convulsed. A horrible, wet, cracking sound echoed as the scalpel pierced the eye socket. The corpse writhed, its arms trembling violently. But I didn't stop. I shoved the drawer with everything I had, forcing the door against it until I heard the crunch of breaking bones. Then, with one swift motion, I pulled the latch and locked it for good. Silence returned. My chest heaved. The smell of blood, formaldehyde, and sweat hung thick in the air. I waited. Seconds. Minutes. Time lost all meaning. The drawer remained still. No sound. No whisper. No pounding. Was it over? Or was it just waiting? I didn't want to find out. I turned, ran to the door, and this time, the latch turned without resistance. The corridor beyond the morgue had never looked so safe. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something was still moving inside. The only thing I knew was that the body should never have been brought here. And whatever it was, it wasn't dead. Not yet. I ran. The hallway seemed endless, fluorescent lights flickering above my head. My body screamed in exhaustion, but fear pushed me forward. Every step echoed through the silent hospital. Every shadow seemed to stretch, trying to reach me. I had to get out, but then something made me stop. The elevator at the end of the hall was open. The metallic door reflected my distorted image, but not just mine. There was another silhouette. Behind me, my heart froze. Slowly, I turned around. The hallway was empty. Nothing. No one. But the silence wasn't normal. It was thick, suffocating, and then a subtle sound, almost imperceptible. The sound of a zipper being opened. The noise came from inside my head, from within the walls, from everywhere. My skin prickled. My hands trembled. I knew what was happening. I never locked the drawer. My blood ran cold. The silence shattered with a crash. A guttural, ragged scream echoed from the morgue. Something fell to the floor. Something heavy. Something that should have never left. The footsteps started again. Dragged. Uneven. But fast. It was coming. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I knew. It didn't matter where I went. It would find me. Reality splintered around me. My memories blurred. The morgue. The body. The scalpel. The scalpel. I looked at my hand. The scalpel was still there, but it wasn't stained with blood. It was clean. And then I understood. The body was never the dead one. I was. My chest tightened. My vision darkened. My reflection in the elevator door changed. The face staring back at me wasn't mine. It was his. The empty eyes. The twisted neck. The torn smile. And then, with a final breath, everything went dark. The elevator doors closed by themselves. The morgue fell silent once more, until the next victim arrived. For more scary stories like these, follow Haunt Hunter. Leave a like and watch the other videos on the channel. Sweet dreams, hunters.